2:14 a.m. September 9, 2024. 4 nautical miles off the coast of a Caribbean marina, international waters. A 32-meter Sunseeker Predator 105 sat dark at anchor, running lights off, no crew visible on deck. 800 meters to the northeast, a Bell 429 Global Ranger helicopter held a fixed hover at 400 feet. Navigation strobes killed, thermal imaging array locked onto the yacht's main salon. Aboard the Bell, a U.S. Marshals tactical coordinator pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece and said nothing. He waited. On the water below, 4 rigid-hull inflatable boats, RHIBs, cut their engines simultaneously and drifted the last 200 meters on momentum alone, paddles out, 8 operators per hull, all wearing plate carriers stenciled DEA and USMS in high-visibility yellow. The lead RHIB carried a fast rope deployment kit rated for the 1.4-meter freeboard of the Sunseeker's aft swim platform. The second carried a hydraulic door breaching kit and a forensic evidence team in gray coveralls. At 2:17 a.m., the radio crackled with a single word. "Dragnet, execute!" The entire fast rope boarding sequence from water surface to deck control took 9 seconds. 9 seconds. That is how long it took a composite task force of U.S. Marshals, DEA Special Operations, and Treasury enforcement agents to take control of a vessel that had been moving cartel money for 7 consecutive years. By 2:31 a.m., the main salon was secured, the engine room was sealed, and a man known in federal court documents only as the subject, a financial architect with a master's degree in international finance and an alias registered across 4 passports, was face down on the teak deck of his own yacht with zip cuffs on his wrists, staring at the grain of the wood he had paid for with other people's futures. By that same morning, 61 days of surveillance, wire interceptions, financial pattern analysis, and international coordination had produced a sealed indictment of 47 counts under 18 U.S.C. 1956, the Federal Money Laundering Statute, and the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The indictment named one subject. It referenced $1.8 billion in laundered cartel proceeds. It identified 3 shell companies, 5 jurisdictions, and a 7-year financial architecture so precisely engineered that it had evaded automated bank compliance flags for the entire duration of its operation. What broke it was not an algorithm, not an international tip. It was a single DEA financial analyst sitting at a government-issue workstation in the basement of a federal building in Chantilly, Virginia, at 11:40 on a Tuesday morning, staring at a line graph of transaction timestamps that looked, to most eyes, completely ordinary. This is the story of Operation Dragnet, and the 61 days that ended on a yacht in the dark. To understand what happened on that water, you need to understand how the architecture was built. Start not with the yacht. Start with the pattern. DEA Special Agent. Priya Raman, 44 years old, 16 years with the DEA's Special Operations Division Financial Intelligence Unit, had spent most of a decade studying what financial analysts call layering, the second phase of classical money laundering, when criminal proceeds already placed into the financial system are moved through a series of transactions designed to obscure their origin. Placement, layering, integration. The textbook model. Most financial crime investigators spent their careers chasing placement, cash deposited into bank accounts, wire transferred through money service businesses, structured in amounts designed to fall below reporting thresholds. Layering was harder. Integration, by the time you saw it, meant the money was already clean and already gone. Raman specialized in layering. Over her career, she had built a methodology she called, informally, rhythm analysis, the study of not what transactions happened, but when, and in what sequence, and whether that sequence had a heartbeat. On the morning of July 10, 2024, Raman was reviewing a batch of suspicious activity reports, SARs, flagged by the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FINCEN, as part of a broad DEA review of offshore corporate accounts linked to known cartel financial infrastructure in the Caribbean basin. The batch contained 214 reports filed over a 7-month window. Most were routine. Most were noise. Raman had been through batches like this hundreds of times. At 11:40 a.m., she paused on a cluster of reports referencing 3 offshore shell companies: Blue Meridian Capital, registered in Nicosia, Cyprus; Artemis Aegean Holdings, registered in the British Virgin Islands; and a third entity, Cascades Private Wealth Management, registered in Panama City, Panama. The 3 companies appeared together in 14 separate SAR filings over 7 months. That alone was not unusual. Shell company clusters were common in layering architectures. What stopped Raman was the sequence. In every single one of the 14 filings, the transaction order was identical. Blue Meridian Capital received the inbound wire first. Artemis Aegean Holdings processed the pass-through second. Cascades Private Wealth Management cleared the outbound third, always in that order, never reversed, never with Artemis going first, never with Cascades receiving direct, and the clearing window, the elapsed time between the first wire hitting Blue Meridian and the final wire leaving Cascades, was, in every single instance, between 68 and 74 hours. A 72-hour window, give or take 3 hours on either side, consistent across 14 cycles spanning 7 months. Raman pulled up a secondary database query and ran the 3 company names against FinCEN's historical SAR archive going back 36 months. The same 3 company sequence appeared in 89 filings, 89 cycles, same order, same 72-hour window. I spent considerable time going through the Analyst notes Raman filed that afternoon, and one observation kept surfacing in every summary she wrote: legitimate international trade settlement almost never clears on a fixed rhythm. Currency fluctuations, correspondent banking delays, time zone differentials, compliance hold windows. Real trade is messy. It clears when it clears. The 72-hour cycle was not the behavior of legitimate commerce. It was the behavior of a programmed system running on a timer. Raman filed a formal referral to the DEA Special Operations Division investigative unit at 2:15 p.m. on July 10th. By 4 p.m., she had a callback from a senior investigative coordinator. By 9 a.m. the following morning, the referral had been escalated to the U.S. Marshals Service International Investigations Branch in Arlington, Virginia. The number Raman had flagged in her referral, based on aggregate transaction volumes across the 89 cycles at an average of $50 million per cycle, approximately $4.45 billion in total wire volume over 36 months. A portion of that could be legitimate layering of already laundered funds recirculating through the same channels. The conservative forensic estimate, once double counting was stripped out, $1.8 billion in probable cartel proceeds moved through the 3-shell architecture. Run the arithmetic in reverse. 89 cycles at an average of $50 million per cycle. $1.8 billion aggregate. 3 shells, Cypriot, BVI, and Panamanian, that had been in operation, based on incorporation records, for just over 7 years. That is a laundering pipeline that processed, on average, $257 million per year every year without triggering a single automated shutdown from any of the correspondent banks involved. Every document was clean. Every wire had a stated commercial purpose attached: import financing, trade credit, commodity settlement. Every shell company had a registered agent, a listed director, and a functioning bank account at a reputable institution. The architecture was not amateurish, it was engineered. Deputy U.S. Marshal Catherine Ellison, 41 years old, 12 years with the U.S. Marshals International Investigations Branch, received the formal case referral on July 11, 2024. Ellison had worked international fugitive and financial crime cases across 14 countries. She had been lead coordinator on 3 prior money laundering prosecutions that resulted in extraditions from jurisdictions with no formal U.S. extradition treaty. She knew what a sophisticated layering architecture looked like, and she knew what it meant when one had been running undisturbed for 7 years. Within 48 hours of receiving the referral, Ellison had assembled the core task force, DEA Special Operations Division Financial Intelligence, Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network Liaison Unit, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and the Justice Department's Asset Forfeiture and Money Laundering Section. The lead investigative designation went to the U.S. Marshals International Investigations Branch. The code name assigned to the investigation, Operation Dragnet. Case file number from the International Investigations Branch, INV-202-000 4-0441. The first sealed warrant, a Title III authorization for electronic interception of communications linked to the three shell company accounts, was approved by a federal magistrate in the Eastern District of Virginia on July 13, 2024. Intercepts went live at 6 a.m. on July 14th. The subject had no public criminal record, no prior federal contacts, no outstanding warrants in any domestic jurisdiction. What he had was a name, a working name, the name on 4 passports that Ellison's team identified in the course of the first 3 weeks of financial forensics, and a biography that, on paper, was entirely unremarkable. The man at the center of the architecture appeared in financial records under the name Lucien Marchetti, 49 years old at the time of the investigation. Every available social contact described him the same way: quiet, methodical, professionally courteous. A financial consultant who worked remotely, traveled frequently. He kept a residence in Monaco, a secondary address in Limassol, Cyprus, and a registered business address in Panama City. Neighbors in Monaco said he paid in cash, tipped generously, and kept no visible staff. No social media presence under any verified identity. He drove a 2021 Mercedes-Benz S-Class and owned a 32-meter Sunseeker Predator 105, the yacht registered under a shell company incorporated in Malta. Beneath Lucien Marchetti, and Ellison's team identified 3 additional passport aliases within the first 3 weeks, was a financial operative who had, according to the case file, entered the Cartel financial architecture sometime around 2017. His educational background, a master's degree in international finance from a European university. His professional history prior to 2017, a decade working as a compliance officer and international fund administrator for legitimate private wealth management firms in Luxembourg and Zurich. He understood correspondent banking from the inside. He understood compliance triggers from the inside. He had, in the language of the indictment, leveraged specialized knowledge of financial regulatory systems to engineer a money laundering architecture specifically designed to exploit the gaps in those systems. The indictment described his role as chief financial architect, not a courier, not a money mule. The person who designed the system, maintained the system, and, critically, was the single point of operational knowledge for the system. If the cartel's financial pipeline was a machine, Marchetti was the only person who knew how every component fit together. That made him, in Ellison's assessment, the most valuable single arrest the task force could make. And it made him, precisely because he understood his own value, almost impossible to approach through conventional means. Here is the architecture as the forensic accounting team reconstructed it over the first 30 days of Operation Dragnet. 3 primary shells, Blue Meridian, Artemis Aegean, Cascades, operated as the visible transaction layer. Behind them, a second tier of 22 nominee director companies spread across Cyprus, Malta, Seychelles, Panama, and the Cayman Islands served as the funding sources. The entities that received the initial cartel cash placement from money service businesses, crypto over-the-counter desks, and trade-based laundering channels in South America and the Caribbean. The 22 second-tier companies fed the 3 primary shells in rotating pairs, ensuring that no single source account ever appeared more than twice in a given 30-day window. The funds moved through the 3 primary shells in their fixed sequence, Blue Meridian, Artemis Aegean, Cascades, and exited into a third tier of integration vehicles, real estate holding companies in Spain and Portugal, a Cypriot investment fund with legitimate minority investors, and a commodity trading subsidiary registered in Dubai. The 72-hour clearing window was not arbitrary. It corresponded precisely to the standard correspondent banking settlement cycle for international wire transfers between the specific jurisdictions involved: Cyprus to BAV to Panama. By clearing within the standard settlement window, Marchetti's architecture ensured that the transactions never triggered the extended hold compliance flags that many correspondent banks apply to wires that linger in suspense accounts. The 72-hour rhythm was camouflage built from a knowledge of banking operations that most money launderers simply do not possess. The strangest part of this case, looking at it from the outside, is not how sophisticated the architecture was. It's how long it ran. 7 years, 89 laundering cycles, $1.8 billion. And what finally broke it open was not an international intelligence sharing agreement, not a bank compliance trigger, not a confidential informant. It was one analyst noticing that the 72-hour window was statistically too consistent to be real. Most people assume that financial operations at this scale eventually attract attention through sheer volume. The evidence here tells a different story. Volume, absent a detectable pattern, is noise. What Marchetti had inadvertently created was not volume. It was a rhythm. And rhythms, eventually, are heard. By the end of Week 3 of Operation Dragnet, the Title III intercepts had produced approximately 1,400 hours of communications across encrypted messaging platforms, satellite phone channels, and standard international telephony. The task force's signals intelligence team, operating out of a secure facility in Chantilly, Virginia, processed the intercepts using both automated keyword and voice print analysis protocols. On August 1, 2024, a voice print match from the intercepts was confirmed against a biometric sample obtained from a 2019 compliance interview recording at a European private bank where Marchetti had held a personal account. The match gave the task force their first confirmed identity lock. The man moving through the intercepts under encrypted aliases was, with a 97.3% biometric confidence rating, Lucian Marchetti. The intercepts also revealed something Ellison had not anticipated. Marchetti knew he was being watched. Not specifically, not by name, but in a series of encrypted exchanges captured in the fourth week of The Wire, Marchetti communicated to an unidentified counterpart that he had observed what he described as irregular patterns in correspondent hold times on several recent transactions. A possible indication, he wrote, that compliance monitoring was elevated on one of the shell accounts. He proposed moving the next cycle to an alternate third-tier integration vehicle and extending the clearing window to 96 hours as a test. This was the obstacle that nearly ended Operation Dragnet before it reached the arrest phase. If Marchetti shifted the architecture, even partially, and the task force moved to intercept the new channels, the resulting judicial process of refiling Title III authorization for the new accounts could take 10 to 14 days. In that window, Marchetti could dissolve the three primary shells entirely and reconstitute the architecture from scratch in new jurisdictions. Ellison had seen it happen before. The task force decided, in consultation with the supervising assistant U.S. attorney, to maintain passive surveillance only and attempt no proactive interdiction of the suspected alternate channels. The logic: Marchetti was cautious, but not certain. If the task force made no move, there was a reasonable probability he would assess the situation as a false alarm and maintain the existing architecture. The risk? If he was more certain than the intercepts suggested, they would lose him. For 9 days, Operation Dragnet held its breath. On August 10th, the 72-hour cycle resumed on the original 3 shells. The alternate test never materialized. Marchetti had apparently concluded the elevated hold times were a standard compliance sweep, not a targeted investigation. The task force exhaled. Put yourself in Ellison's position for a moment. 12 years of international financial crime work, a 61-day operational clock, and the entire case hinging on whether the subject decides to trust his own instincts or not. 9 days of watching surveillance logs for a single wire transfer to move. The second obstacle was jurisdictional. The Sunseeker yacht, where the task force had confirmed, through passive surveillance and vessel tracking data, that Marchetti spent most of his time when not in Monaco, was registered under a Maltese shell company and typically anchored in international waters or within the territorial jurisdiction of Caribbean island nations that had no existing mutual legal assistance treaty with the United States covering financial crimes enforcement at sea. A direct maritime interdiction would require either a flag state boarding authorization from Malta or a coordinated international enforcement action under maritime law that could take months to arrange through diplomatic channels. The solution came from the U.S. Coast Guard Maritime Law Enforcement Division, which had a pre-existing bilateral maritime agreement with the relevant flag state covering vessels suspected of narcotics trafficking. The agreement allowed for a requested flag state boarding by U.S. law enforcement in international waters with 72-hour advance notification to the flag state authority. The flag state notification was filed at 9 a.m. on September 7, 2024, identifying the vessel under its registered name. The 72-hour clock began. The tactical planning for the boarding operation was completed in 4 days. The composite tactical element: 12 U.S. Marshals Special Operations Group operators, 8 DEA tactical agents, 4 Coast Guard maritime law enforcement officers, and a 4-person forensic evidence team, assembled at a staging facility on a U.S.-friendly island 22 nautical miles from Marchetti's last confirmed anchorage position on the evening of September 8th. The operation was structured in 3 teams. Alpha Team, 6 Marshals, SOG operators, would conduct the fast rope boarding on the aft swim platform using the lead RHIB, with the primary objective of securing the main salon and the bridge. Bravo Team, 4 DEA tactical agents and 2 Marshals, would board simultaneously via the bow using grappling lines, securing the forward cabin spaces and any crew quarters. Charlie Team, the remaining 4 Coast Guard officers, would hold perimeter on 2 of the RHIBs, preventing any small vessel departure from the yacht, while the Bell 429 maintained overhead surveillance and communications relay at 400 feet. Intelligence from the intercepts and from passive visual surveillance over the preceding week had established that the yacht was crewed by a captain and 2 deckhands, none believed to be armed, and that Marchetti was accompanied by a 2-person personal security detail observed carrying sidearms during dockside approaches. The tactical briefing assessed the primary threat as the security detail, not the crew. The operation was set for 2:14 a.m. local time on September 9th, a window chosen for maximum darkness, minimum maritime traffic, and based on surveillance-derived analysis of the yacht's typical crew rotation schedule showing the security detail moved to below-deck rest positions between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. At 2:11 a.m., the 4 RHIBs deployed from a holding position 1,200 meters northeast of the Sunseeker. The Bell 429 killed its navigation lights and held station at 400 feet, thermal array active, tracking 4 heat signatures below deck and 1 on the bridge watch. At 2:13 a.m., the RHIBs cut engines and paddled the final 200 meters. At 2:14 a.m., the tactical coordinator's single word went over the encrypted radio channel. Alpha Team hit the aft swim platform first. The fast rope deployment from the Bell, not required given the platform's low freeboard, was held in reserve. The operators went directly over the stern rail by hand, stacked, and cleared the aft deck in under 9 seconds. The lone deckhand on bridge watch was taken into custody without resistance. Simultaneously, Bravo Team cleared the bow rail and moved forward to aft through the exterior deck. The forward crew cabin, 2 deckhands, was secured in the first 90 seconds. No resistance. The security detail was located in the main salon, both individuals asleep on a sectional sofa with sidearms holstered on the table in front of them. The entry to the main salon was a sliding glass door with a manual lock. Alpha Team's point operator bypassed the lock with a standard pick set in 11 seconds. Federal agents, hands where we can see them, do not reach for the table. Both security personnel complied immediately. Sidearms were secured. Neither individual fired a shot. The entire above deck and main salon clearance, from the first operator over the stern rail to the last handcuff closed, took 4 minutes and 38 seconds. Marchetti was not in the main salon. He was in the master cabin, 2 levels below the main deck, behind a reinforced interior door. Not a formal panic room, but a solid core marine-grade door with a manual deadbolt operated from the inside. Thermal imaging from a handheld unit confirmed 1 heat signature inside. Alpha Team's leader spoke through the door in a level voice. "Mr. Marchetti, this is a federal arrest operation. You are in international waters under a flag state boarding authorization. The vessel is fully secured. Open the door or we will open it for you." 40 seconds of silence. Then, the deadbolt disengaged. The door opened. Lucian Marchetti, 49 years old, in a gray linen shirt, no shoes, stepped back from the doorway with both hands raised to shoulder height. He said nothing. He looked at the 4 operators facing him, looked at the handcuffs, and looked at the floor. "You have the right to remain silent," the lead operator said, and that was the extent of the conversation. No shots were fired by either the subject or his security detail during the entire boarding operation. The one moment of friction came from the captain, a Dutch national who informed the boarding team in precise English that they had, quote, "no jurisdiction on this vessel." The Coast Guard maritime law enforcement officer standing next to him presented a physical copy of the flag state authorization and a copy of the federal arrest warrant signed by a federal magistrate judge in the Eastern District of Virginia. The captain read both documents, handed them back, and cooperated fully for the remainder of the operation. The forensic evidence team boarded at 2:31 a.m. and began the systematic documentation and collection of physical and digital evidence. What they found aboard the Sunseeker Predator 105 was described in the subsequent court filing as a mobile financial operations center, 3 encrypted laptop computers, 2 satellite uplink terminals, a hardware security module, a dedicated device for storing cryptographic keys for financial transaction authentication, 14 prepaid SIM cards, 6 burner phones, 4 of which still had active call histories, and a physical ledger, a bound notebook with handwritten entries in a coded alphanumeric system, tucked inside a hollowed-out marine navigation chart book in the master cabin. That ledger would take forensic accountants 11 weeks to decode. What it contained when they finished would extend the reach of Operation Dragnet far beyond one man on one yacht. The evidence inventory completed aboard the vessel totaled 847 individual items documented and bagged before the forensic team concluded processing at 9:14 a.m. on September 9th. The Sunseeker Predator 105 was taken under tow by a Coast Guard cutter at 9:30 a.m. and transported to a U.S.-controlled port facility for full forensic processing. The press conference announcing the arrest was held at 2 p.m. on September 10, 2024, at the Justice Department's main briefing room in Washington, D.C. The Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division, flanked by the Director of the U.S. Marshals Service and the DEA Administrator, announced the arrest under the codename Operation Dragnet and described it as the largest single money laundering prosecution involving cartel financial infrastructure in the preceding decade. The numbers presented: $1.8 billion in laundered proceeds identified, $220 million in assets immediately seized, including the yacht, the contents of 3 shell company bank accounts frozen under court order, and 2 real estate properties in Europe tied to Marchetti's integration tier vehicles. Here is what the numbers looked like in aggregate: $1.8 billion laundered across 89 cycles over 7 years. $220 million seized in the immediate enforcement action, approximately 12 cents seized for every laundered dollar. That ratio is worth sitting with. The standard recovery rate in complex international money laundering prosecutions is between 8 and 15% of total proceeds because the majority of integrated funds have already been converted into assets that require extended judicial process to trace and forfeit. The 22 second-tier shell companies and the third-tier integration vehicles were the subject of ongoing forfeiture litigation at the time of the indictment. Final recovery estimates, according to Financial Crimes, analysts at the time of indictment ranged between $300 and $400 million. Here is an observation the press conference did not make. The financial system that allowed this architecture to operate for 7 years, undisturbed, through dozens of compliant correspondent banks that process the transactions without flagging the sequence, deserves scrutiny alongside the man who designed it. Marchetti exploited gaps that the compliance industry had years to close. That those gaps remained open is not his failure alone. A Marshals Service deputy on the forensic team was the first person to open the evidence locker containing the physical ledger at the Chantilly facility. She noted in a debrief recorded as part of the case file that when she turned the first page of the notebook and began to recognize the pattern of the alphanumeric entries, her first reaction was not satisfaction. It was something closer to dread. Because the ledger was not just a record of what Marchetti had moved, it was a client directory. The trial of Lucien Marchetti, tried under that name, the identity confirmed by biometric and documentary evidence across all 4 passport aliases, opened in federal court in the Eastern District of Virginia on February 3, 2025. The case was assigned to a senior U.S. District Court judge with extensive prior experience in complex financial crime and RICO prosecutions. The defense presented a 2-track argument. Track 1, that Marchetti had operated as a financial intermediary in good faith, relying on representations from his clients that the funds flowing through the shell architecture were derived from legitimate international trade and investment activity, and that he lacked the specific intent required under 18 U.S.C. 1956 for a knowing money laundering conviction. Track 2, that the Title III wiretap authorization had been obtained on the basis of circumstantial pattern analysis that fell below the probable cause standard and that the evidence derived from those intercepts should be suppressed. The federal magistrate who had issued the Title III authorization testified regarding the probable cause standard applied. The Title III motion was denied. On the substantive charges, the prosecution's evidence was structured in 4 layers. First, the financial forensics, 847 individually documented transactions, reconstructed by forensic accountants from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, demonstrating the 89-cycle architecture in granular detail, with the specific dollar amounts, transaction timestamps, and correspondent bank routing data for each cycle. Second, the intercept evidence, 1,400 hours of communications in which Marchetti, identified by voice print analysis at a 97.3% confidence rating, discussed the management of the shell architecture in explicit operational terms, including references to specific cycles by number and specific integration vehicles by name. Third, the physical ledger, decoded over 11 weeks by the forensic accounting team, it contained entries corresponding to 74 of the 89 laundering cycles, with client identifiers on the receivables side that the prosecution linked through subsequent financial investigation. 2 specific cartel financial networks in South America and the Caribbean. Fourth, accomplice testimony from one of Marchetti's 2 security personnel, a cooperating witness who provided direct testimony regarding Marchetti's operational role in managing the architecture and his awareness of the criminal provenance of the funds. I went through the full court transcript across 7 weeks of testimony, and one detail kept surfacing: the precision of the financial reconstruction. The IRS forensic accountants had rebuilt not just the 89 cycles, but the internal logic of the architecture. They could demonstrate, transaction by transaction, exactly how the 72-hour window was engineered to exploit specific correspondent banking settlement protocols. The architecture was genuinely elegant in a technical sense. That did not help the defense. The jury deliberated for 9 hours over 2 days, guilty on all 47 counts, 18 U.S.C. 1956, money laundering, 18 U.S.C. 1957, engaging in monetary transactions in criminally derived property, RICO, 18 U.S.C. 1962. Conspiracy charges under each substantive count. The presiding judge handed down sentencing on April 22, 2025. 26 years in federal custody, sentences on the primary counts to run consecutively, with no parole eligibility under federal sentencing guidelines for the RICO conviction. A forfeiture order covering all identified assets tied to the shell architecture, the yacht, the 2 European properties, all identified bank account balances, and a supplemental money judgment of $220 million against Marchetti personally. The judge noted in a formal sentencing statement that the scale and duration of the offense and the subject's specialized professional background as a former compliance officer were both factors considered in the sentencing calculation. The ledger decoded to 61 pages of client identifiers. The forensic accounting team, working with the Justice Department's Asset Forfeiture and Money Laundering Section and FinCEN, spent the 12 months following the arrest tracing those identifiers through correspondent banking records, corporate registry databases, and financial intelligence shared under mutual legal assistance treaty provisions with 3 cooperating jurisdictions. What they found, and what the Justice Department disclosed in a partially redacted court filing in March 2025, was a client directory that extended across 4 continents. The receivables side of the ledger included identifiers linked to financial networks in South America, the Caribbean, West Africa, and Eastern Europe. The integration side entries, the third-tier vehicles where the clean funds ended up, included references to real estate investment vehicles with beneficial owners that the financial intelligence team linked through multi-step corporate registry tracing to a range of individuals including offshore fund managers, a European telecommunications executive, and the beneficial owners of 2 political party financing vehicles in jurisdictions outside the United States. None of those names appeared in the original indictment. All of them are, As of the date of this reconstruction, the subject of ongoing financial intelligence review by Interpol's Financial Crimes Unit under the referral package submitted by the U.S. Marshals International Investigations Branch following Marchetti's sentencing. Interpol issued red notices for 3 individuals identified through the ledger in the 6 months following sentencing. The remaining names are inside Interpol case files and ongoing federal grand jury proceedings in the Eastern District of Virginia. They are not yet in handcuffs. The Sunseeker Predator 105, hull value at time of seizure approximately $3.2 million, was sold at federal asset auction in November 2024. Proceeds were directed to the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, allocated in part to victim restitution and in part to financial crime enforcement programs. The 3 shell companies, Blue Meridian Capital, Artemis Aegean Holdings, Cascades Private Wealth Management, were formally dissolved by their respective registering jurisdictions following court orders obtained through mutual legal assistance procedures. Their bank accounts remain frozen pending the completion of the civil forfeiture litigation against the 22 second-tier entities. The 61 days of Operation Dragnet began with one analyst in Chantilly, Virginia, noticing that a 72-hour transaction window was statistically too consistent to be legitimate. One rhythm on a line graph in the middle of 214 routine suspicious activity reports in a batch that most reviewers would have processed and filed without a second look. What do you think? Is the real failure here one man's greed or a financial compliance architecture that let a pattern run for 7 years without triggering a single automatic flag? Tell us in the comments. A 72-hour clock ran 89 times over 7 years and no automated system caught it. One person did. Every financial institution in this country processes wire transfers on a correspondent settlement cycle. And somewhere inside those transaction logs, there are other rhythms that no algorithm has yet learned to hear. If you want to keep walking through federal case files like this one, the way the agents themselves walked through them, subscribe to FBI Documents and tell us in the comments which unsolved case you want us to open next. Case closed.